He didn't text. He called, which made it worse. When my son calls in the middle of a Tuesday morning, it's never small talk. I had just poured my second cup of coffee and was standing at the kitchen window, watching the neighbor's dog dig up what was left of my hostas, when my phone buzzed on the counter, his name on the screen. I set down the mug and answered, "Mom." The way he said it, careful and rehearsed, like a word he'd been practicing in the car. "I need to talk to you about the promotion dinner." His company was holding a formal event the following weekend. A dinner at the Whitmore Club downtown, the kind of place with valet parking and cloth napkins folded into swans. My son had been working toward a senior vice president title for 3 years, and they were finally making it official in front of the whole firm. I already had my dress picked out, dark green, knee-length, the one I'd worn to my niece's graduation and gotten 3 compliments on. "I think it might be better," he said slowly, "if you didn't come." I didn't respond right away. I stood very still by the window. The dog next door had gotten all the way through to the root. "The partners will all be there," he continued, "and their wives. It's a very specific crowd, Mom. I don't want you to feel out of place." Out of place. I was 68 years old. I'd raised him alone in a house I paid for by working double shifts at a dental office for 11 years. I'd packed his lunches until he was old enough to complain about it. I'd co-signed his first car loan when no bank would touch him at 23. "I understand," I said, because I didn't know what else to say that wouldn't come out jagged. "It's not personal." "No," I said. "Of course not." We hung up and I stood there for a long time with my hand on the counter. The coffee went cold. I didn't drink it. His name is Caleb. He's 39. He has his father's jaw and, apparently, his father's talent for making me feel like I need to apologize for existing. I didn't cry that first day. I drove to the grocery store, bought things I didn't need, came home and reorganized the pantry. It's what I do when I don't know what to do with my hands. By evening, I had alphabetized the spices and still hadn't decided how to feel. My neighbor Ruth Ann came over Thursday evening with a bottle of Chardonnay she said was left over from book club, which we both knew wasn't true. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and I told her what happened. She set down her glass. "He said you'd feel out of place." Those were his words. She looked at me the way only a woman who has known you for 20 years can look at you. "And Joanna set him up to say that." Joanna. His wife of 6 years. I'd tried, genuinely tried, from the beginning. I'd brought food to their apartment when they first moved in. I'd offered to help with the wedding invitations. I'd shown up when she asked and stayed away when she didn't. None of it ever seemed to land right. Ruth Ann wasn't wrong. Joanna had always kept a careful distance from me, the kind that's never rude enough to confront, but always cold enough to feel. She called me by my first name, Vera, but made it sound like a formality. She scheduled holiday dinners and seated me at the far end of the table, next to whoever needed babysitting. "Maybe," I said. "Not maybe." Ruthann refilled her glass. "She's been redecorating that marriage since the honeymoon." I almost laughed. Almost. I went to my closet that night and looked at the green dress, still hung there with the tags from the dry cleaner. I'd bought a small clutch to go with it, soft black leather, second-hand, but in perfect condition. I'd found it at the estate sale on Birchwood Avenue and felt clever about it for a week. I put it back on the shelf. I turned off the light. The week that followed was the slow kind. I went to my part-time job at the public library. Processed returns, helped a woman find large print editions of Agatha Christie, ate lunch alone in the break room. Nobody there knew about the dinner. I didn't tell them. On Wednesday, I was shelving books in the 600 section when a woman appeared at the end of the aisle. She was somewhere in her early 70s, I'd guess. Silver hair cut short and neat, glasses on a chain around her neck. She was looking for something on the shelf and couldn't find it. "Can I help?" I asked. She turned. Something about her face was familiar in a way I couldn't place. "I'm looking for anything on estate law," she said, "specifically regarding adult children and asset distribution." I walked her to the right section. We found 2 relevant titles. She tucked them both under her arm. "Thank you," she said. "You work here often? Part-time?" "3 days a week." She looked at me a moment. "You're Caleb Garrison's mother, aren't you?" I went still. "I am." She extended her hand. "Frances Alderman." Oh. I went still. "I am." She extended her hand. "Frances Alderman. My husband is a senior partner at Caleb's firm. We've met once before at the holiday party 3 years ago. You were there with your son." I remembered, vaguely. A brief introduction, then Joanna steering Caleb towards someone more important. Frances had a direct way of looking at a person. Not unkind, just honest. "I was surprised when I heard you wouldn't be at the dinner," she said. "I assumed there was a conflict with your schedule." Something tightened in my chest. "Something like that." She studied me for a moment. "I see." She didn't press. She just looked at the books in her arms and said, almost to herself, "That's a shame." We parted at the end of the aisle. I watched her go and stood there between the shelves for a moment, not sure what had just passed between us. 2 days before the dinner, my phone rang. "Frances Alderman. I don't know how she got my number, and I didn't ask. I'd like you to come to the dinner," she said, "as my guest. My husband agrees." I sat down on the arm of the sofa. "Mrs. Alderman, Frances. Frances, I don't think that's a good idea." "I think it's an excellent idea," she said. "You belong there. And I find, at our age, that belonging somewhere and being invited are two entirely different things." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. That night, I took the green dress out again, laid it flat on the bed, ran my hand along the fabric. It was good quality. I'd paid more than I should have, but I'd told myself it was for something that mattered. I didn't sleep. I spent the next day going back and forth. Who shows up to their son's work event after being told not to? A woman with nothing to lose, maybe. Or a woman who has finally run out of patience for pretending she has no feelings worth defending. I thought about Caleb at age 10, running to find me after a bad day at school. I thought about him at 17, sitting across from me at the diner we always went to, telling me he'd gotten into his first choice college. The way he'd looked at me that day, proud of himself, yes, but also wanting me to see it, wanting me there. When had that changed? I couldn't find the exact moment. It had happened the way water gets into a wall, slowly, invisibly, until one day the whole surface gives. Frances called Saturday morning. "The car will come at 6, she said, "unless you've decided otherwise." I looked at the dress hanging on the back of my door. 6 is fine, I said. I did my hair carefully, wore the pearl earrings I'd inherited from my own mother. Small, not showy, but real. The dress fit the same as it always had. I stood in front of the mirror and decided the woman looking back was someone who had earned her seat at the table. Even if no one had saved her one, Frances was already in the car when it arrived. She wore navy, elegant, a single strand of gold at her throat. She looked at me and nodded with approval. "You look exactly right," she said. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," she said. "Means you're taking it seriously." The Whitmore Club was exactly what I'd imagined. Dark wood paneling, low lighting, the smell of warm bread and old money. Waitstaff moved between tables like they'd been born doing it. The room was arranged in rounds of 10, with a long head table at the front where the evening's honorees would sit. Caleb was one of 3 people being promoted that night. We arrived just as cocktail hour was winding down. Frances moved through the room with the ease of someone who owned parts of it. People greeted her husband, Thomas Alderman, who shook hands and laughed at just the right moments. Frances stayed near me. I saw Caleb before he saw me. He was standing near the bar with 2 colleagues, jackets off, ties still perfect. He looked successful. He looked like someone I'd driven to soccer practice and argued with about curfew and watched graduate on a folding chair in the August heat. He looked like someone I didn't quite recognize anymore. Then he turned and saw me. The glass in his hand stopped halfway to his mouth. Joanna was beside him. She noticed before he could compose himself. Her expression moved through surprise, then confusion, then something harder. the look of someone whose arrangements have been disturbed. I held my ground. Francis was at my elbow. They crossed the room together. Caleb first, Joanna half a step behind. Mom. His voice was low, controlled. What are you doing here? Francis invited me, I said simply. I accepted. He glanced at Frances. She met his eyes with the calm of a woman who had been navigating rooms like this for 40 years. Caleb, she said pleasantly. Your mother was kind enough to join us. Thomas is looking forward to catching up with her. Joanna's jaw tightened. We just weren't expecting. No, I agreed. I imagine not. There was a long second. Caleb looked at me with something I couldn't read. Not anger, exactly, and not guilt either. Something between the two that lives in people who know they've done something they can't undo in public. This isn't the time, Joanna said softly. Then we won't make it one, Frances said. She touched my arm lightly. Come, Thomas will want to say hello. We walked away. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my face stayed even. I had made a decision before walking through those doors. Whatever happened, I would not perform distress for their comfort. Thomas Alderman was a big man with a warm handshake and an easy manner. He remembered me from the holiday party. He asked about the library, asked if I was still living in the same house, said he admired anyone who kept an old house going. It was small talk, but it was genuine, and right then, genuineness was a luxury. We were seated at a table near the center of the room. Not at the margins, not tucked away. Francis had arranged that too, I suspected. The table included two other couples and a woman around my age named Dolores, who was there as a guest of the firm's HR director and seemed as mildly bewildered by the occasion as I was. We found each other within minutes, the way people do when they're both slightly out of their element but determined not to show it. Dinner moved the way formal dinners do. Courses arriving and departing, conversation rising and falling, wine poured at intervals by people who never made eye contact. I ate carefully. I listened more than I spoke. Across the room I could see Caleb at the head table, and I could tell in the way you can tell after 39 years of watching someone's face that he was aware of me every minute. The speeches began after the main course. The firm's managing director spoke about growth and vision and talent cultivated. He called up the three honorees one at a time. When Caleb's name was announced, I watched him walk to the front of the room. He shook the director's hand, accepted a framed certificate and an envelope. He smiled. Everyone applauded. He gave a short speech, thanked the firm, thanked his colleagues, thanked Joanna for her patience through the long hours. He looked around the room as he spoke, making eye contact with table after table. He did not look at mine. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Dolores, beside me, refilled her water glass. I did not move. Later, when the music started and the room relaxed into conversation and movement, a young woman appeared at our table. Early 20s, dark braided hair, a press badge clipped to her lapel. She introduced herself as working for the firm's internal communications team, documenting the evening. I'm getting photos of family members, she said. Would you mind? I looked at Frances. She nodded slightly. Go ahead, I said. The young woman, her name was Simone, raised her camera. Frances and I sat straight. The flash was soft. Simone looked at the screen. That's a great one, she said. Then, with the directness of someone young enough to still say what she means, are you his mom? I saw you come in together. She's here as my guest, Frances said. Simone nodded. She seemed to understand more than she let on. Well, you both look incredible, she said and moved on. Frances leaned toward me. You're holding up beautifully. I feel like I'm holding my breath, I whispered. Same thing, she said. The evening wore on. I spoke with Thomas about his upcoming retirement. I listened to Dolores talk about her daughter's graduate program. I ate the dessert, which was a small chocolate thing with a raspberry sauce, and found it surprisingly good. Caleb came to our table once, late in the evening. He came alone. Joanna was somewhere near the bar with the wives of two other partners. He stood at the edge of the table with his hands in his pockets. Can we talk? He said. To me, not to the table. I set down my dessert fork. Of course. We moved to a quieter corner near the window that looked out over the downtown street. The city was doing what cities do at night, moving, lit up, indifferent. "I didn't know Francis was going to invite you," he said. "I know. I meant what I said, Mom. I was worried about you feeling Caleb." I said his name quietly but clearly. "You were worried about how I would look. That's different." He was quiet. "You were afraid I would say something wrong, or dress wrong, or not know which fork to use." I paused. "I've been using the right forks my whole life. You just never watched." His jaw worked. "That's not fair." "I didn't come here for fair," I said. "I came because I have a right to watch my son be recognized for something he worked hard for, and because someone who barely knows me saw that more clearly than you did." He looked out the window. The light from the street caught the side of his face. For a moment he looked very young, and I felt the old pull of it, the reflex to soften things for him. I let it pass. "She's changed things," I said carefully. "I understand that. Marriages do that. But I'm still your mother. And I'm still here. And I'm not going to disappear to make things simpler for you." He turned to look at me. His expression had gone somewhere complicated, not angry, not apologetic, just stripped of the performance, the face underneath. "I know," he said finally. "Good." I picked up my small clutch from where I'd hung it on the chair back. "Go back to your evening. I won't cause any trouble." He nodded once. "Mom, you look nice." "I know," I said again. "I always have." I walked back to the table. Francis looked at me. I shook my head slightly, meaning later. The rest of the evening passed quietly. The room slowly emptied. We stayed until it was socially appropriate to leave, not a minute longer, not a minute sooner. In the car on the way home, Francis and I didn't speak much. The city lights moved past the windows. I watched them. "You were steady," she said as we pulled up to my house. "I had a good example," I said. She smiled. She waited until I was inside before the car moved on. I hung the green dress up carefully. I set the clutch on the shelf. I fed my cat, who did not care where I had been, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table with all the lights on and let myself feel the weight of the evening. I wasn't satisfied exactly, but I was present. And after months of quietly shrinking myself around Caleb and Joanna's preferences, that felt like something. 3 days later, Joanna called. Not Caleb, Joanna. I almost didn't answer. Then I did, because I have never been someone who avoids a conversation that needs to happen. "I want to be honest with you, Vera," she said. She never called me anything warmer, not in 6 years. "All right," I said. "I didn't ask Caleb to tell you not to come. I waited, but I didn't stop him either." The silence between us was different from the usual kind, more honest. "I've been trying to build something," she said. "A certain kind of life. And I know that sounds cold. I know how that sounds." "It sounds like you're embarrassed by where he came from," I said. "Which means you're embarrassed by where he comes from." She didn't deny it. That surprised me. "I think," she said slowly, "I thought if I could control the edges of things, the right schools, the right firm, the right dinners, it would feel more solid, more real." But Frances Alderman pulled your chair out herself. Everyone saw. I looked at the window above the sink. The light was doing that thing it does in October, low and golden. "You can't curate someone out of existence," I said. "She understands that. You'll learn it eventually." Joanna was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to try again, if you're willing." "I'm not unwilling," I said. "But I'm not going to pretend the last 6 years were something other than what they were. I know. And Caleb needs to say it himself. Not through you. I know that too." We hung up without making plans. That was fine. Plans could come later, or they wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't going to build a bridge on someone else's timeline. Caleb called 2 days after that. He didn't practice it this time. Or if he did, it didn't sound that way. "I handled it wrong," he said. "The dinner, and probably a lot of things before that." "Yes," I said. "I don't have a good explanation. I'm not asking for one." He paused. "Then what are you asking for?" I looked around my kitchen, the spice rack, still alphabetized, the cat asleep on the radiator cover. The mug I'd been using for 20 years, chipped at the handle, still my favorite. I'm asking you to stop making me earn my place in your life, I said. That's all. He exhaled. Yeah, okay. It wasn't a declaration or a transformation, just a word, 4 letters, but they were his and he meant them. We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things, his commute, the neighbor's renovation, whether I'd thought about getting a new car. At the end, before we hung up, he said the dress was a good color. I know, I said. And finally, I let myself smile. Months passed, not smoothly, but honestly. Joanna and I did not become close. I don't think we ever will. But we stopped being careful around each other in the way that cuts, and started being careful in the way that means something is being handled with respect. She called me by my first name still, but the temperature behind it shifted by a few degrees. Enough. Caleb started calling on Sunday mornings again. Not every week, but enough that I knew it was a choice he was making. Frances and I had lunch twice. She was sharp and funny in ways that surprised me, with opinions about mystery novels and local politics that she delivered like someone who had earned the right to say exactly what she thought. I told her once that she reminded me of someone I wanted to have been at 40. She said I struck her as someone who still had time. Dolores from the dinner reached out through the library. She started coming in on Thursdays. We got into the habit of coffee in the break room when my shift ended. She had her own version of the same kind of story, different details, same shape. We didn't need to explain much to each other. There's a particular loneliness that comes with being a woman of a certain age, when the people who were supposed to be your place in the world start treating you like a responsibility instead of a person. Like something to be managed rather than known. I'd been living inside that loneliness for longer than I'd admitted to myself. The night of the dinner changed something. Not because I won anything, or proved a point, or made Caleb feel what I felt, but because I stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to show up. I got in a car in a green dress with pearl earrings, and I went. That was enough. That turned out to be the whole thing. I still have the clutch, on the shelf. I still have the dress. Someday there will be another occasion, or there won't, but either way the dress hangs there, like a decision I've already made. If you've ever been asked to make yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger, I want you to know something. The room you were asked to stay out of, you have a right to walk into it. You always did. Maybe you just needed someone to open the door first. Or maybe, one day, you'll be the one who opens it for somebody else. That's the only part that really matters in the end. Not who let you in, that you went. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand or philosophical way, just the quiet, practical kind. The kind where you trace a thing back to where it started and realize that almost nothing happens without a reason, and almost nothing ends without teaching you something, whether you wanted the lesson or not. Caleb didn't become someone who could tell me not to come by accident. That took years. It took small choices. His and mine stacked so gradually that neither of us noticed the shape they were making. He chose to let Joanna edit the edges of his life, and I chose to stay quiet about it each time I felt trimmed away. I called it patience. Looking back, some of it was just fear of losing him by saying what was true. What I didn't understand then is that silence, when practiced long enough, teaches people that you don't need to be considered. I taught him that I could be left out, and so he left me out. That's not blame. That's just how it works. We train the people around us with everything we accept and everything we don't. I had accepted too much for too long. What Frances did, picking up the phone, arranging a car, sitting beside me in that room, was not a small thing. She had no obligation to me. We had barely spoken once before. But she saw something that my own son had stopped seeing, which was that I was a person who deserved to be present in her own life. There's a particular kind of intelligence in that. Not book learning, not career intelligence, but the kind that comes from living long enough to know what actually matters. She had it. I was still finding mine. Walking into that dinner was the hardest thing I had done in years. Not because I was afraid of a room full of strangers, but because I was finally choosing myself in a place where I had always chosen to disappear. That is a different kind of courage. Not dramatic, not loud, but the kind that costs something real. The kind that shakes the hands afterward. What I want anyone to take from this is not that you should confront people, or show up uninvited, or make a point. That's not what I did. What I did was decide that my presence had value even when someone I loved had forgotten it. That is something worth practicing. It starts small. Saying no to one thing that diminishes you, saying yes to one room you've been quietly talked out of. It builds. Slowly, then faster. Caleb is not a bad person. Joanna is not a villain. They were people doing what people do when they are too focused on what they want their life to look like to notice what it's actually made of. We all do that. I did it too, in different ways. The difference is whether you're willing to see it and take a step toward something truer. I'm still wearing that green dress. Not today, but it's there, ready. And these days, I don't wait for an invitation to feel like I belong somewhere. I already know that I do.